Fragrance has had an incredible history. It's had peaks and valleys, and has been many things to many people. In ancient Egypt, resins from trees that were then transformed into smells such as frankincense and myrrh were a showcase of religious faith and used in traditions and rituals. In both the Persian and Roman empires, scent was seen as a showcase of the beauty of the extensive empires, and the Romans even took it one step further. They perfumed the walls and the streets, probably to cover up the smell of the primitive sewers, but we won't get into that here. With such a grand history, it would be easy to get very carried away down this rabbit hole of fragrance history, but we're going to focus on the years that has brought us all the way to this. Fine fragrance, cologne, aftershave, perfume, whatever you want to call it. These are the years that paved the way to where we all are now. I'm George the Fragrance Apprentice, and here are the 8 most important years in modern fragrance history, ranked by importance and impact that it made on the industry today. Number 8, 2010. 2010 is an important year because of 2 releases that would shape almost everything that fragrance is today. One more important than the other, but which one? Well, I'll let you duke it out in the comments section. I'm sure it'll be a completely civil discussion. One was Aventus by Creed, the other was Bleu de Chanel by Chanel. Okay, fine, I'll tell you. Out of the 2 releases, it was actually probably Bleu de Chanel that had the biggest impact out of the 2 Goliath fragrances. Well, in the short term anyway. You see, in 2010, Creed was not a known brand, popularity-wise. In fact, I'm currently writing a 10 most unexpected fragrance hits list, and spoilers ahead, Aventus is on that list. Everybody who knew Creed, and that wasn't really many, saw it as a Ponzi brand, the brand that rich celebrity types and snobby posh people wore. Bleu de Chanel was released by Chanel and did have a far greater widespread reach. It was the beginning of the wave of blue fragrances that we're all suffering in today. Meanwhile, Aventus was in the wings, building momentum to become the superstar that it would later become. Other notable releases was 24 Gold, which was certainly not supposed to garner the success that it did, and the first ever release of the Vulgari Man line. Mainstream designers in 2010 were still very much kings of the fragrance landscape. There were absolutely thriving niche fragrance lines, including the private lines, most notably of Tom Ford, Christian Dior and Giorgio Armani, but they knew their place. Mainstream designers were still the big sellers, and they would rule the fragrance economy with comfort and stability. Little did they know what was to come next, but we'll get to that soon enough. But if you look at the history books of where the blue, sweet resinous aquatics and the return of the woodier citrus fougères with Aventus, it's 2010 when this all started. But what was the first ever fragrance trend, and when did it start? Well, that has got to be number 7. Now, I said that this was going to be a modern history list, but we're going to have to go back to the year 1709 for that. Now, don't worry, I'm pretty certain it's my day to use the TARDIS. I'm sure that Chris won't mind me using it this week. Look, we can do this. He's not looking! Quick, quick, quick! Get in! Get in! We're going to travel to nearly 311 years into the past and meet a gentleman by the name of Giovanni Maria Farina. Hold on! Oh, right. So anyway, we're going to meet a wonderful Italian gentleman who was living his best life in Germany, but would occasionally get homesick for Italy. This man was an Italian through and through, but was trying to find a compromise between his past and where he was living now. He was also a perfumier and started experimenting with citruses and herbs until he created a scent that he described in a letter to his brother, a fragrance that reminds me of an Italian spring morning, of mountain daffodils and orange blossoms after the rain. He had got himself something of Italy for his senses, but to thread the needle of also accepting his present home, he decided to name his fragrance after the place that he lived in Germany, and that place was called Cologne. Yes, this was the first ever eau de cologne. It's amazing to think that Cologne, a very beautiful, picturesque village in Germany, is now referred to so generically. Oh, I'm wearing cologne. Or it's used in the industry standard of measurement, the weakest trio of eau de cologne, eau de toilette and eau de parfum. Yes, the origin is because of Giovanni's desire to consolidate his past and his present. So fascinating. With notes of lemon, bergamot, jasmine, rosemary, rose and vetiver, all notes that we all take for granted today. This was one of the first true compositions that became iconic and took the world by storm. Its demand became massive in high royal courts of many different countries. This put Cologne on the map and helped facilitate the idea of perfume as something that could be popular and marketable. There's varying reports of which company has the true formula. Some say it's 4711 that has the closest interpretation, and others say it's Jean Marie Farina Extra Ville by Roger and Gallet, which was apparently released in 1806, but others say that it's Farina 1709, which is run by the actual descendants of Giovanni himself and can be found on Amazon and the official website. One thing is for certain: it's not Acqua di Parma's Colonia. In fact, with release dates like 1709 and 1806, it makes Acqua di Parma's constant touting that Colonia was released 100 years ago and released in 1916, it makes them look a little bit late to the party. Where were you, lads? You were literally 2 centuries behind the time. It's like a brand 300 years in the future touting that they have a 100-year-old Aventus duplicate. Wait, hang on. Is that Acqua di Parma? Is Acqua di Parma a clone brand? A clone brand that's 200 years late? This is blowing my mind. Let's move on. Speaking of clones, number 6, 2016. Why 2016? Well, that's when Dua came into the picture. Now, some of you may be completely lost, but there are bigger implications with the creation of Dua and eventually Alexandria that people really don't want to admit. With the use of gas chromatography, which was not invented in 2016 by any stretch of the imagination. For those of you who do not know, gas chromatography, which is a kind of scanning device that can be used to isolate and identify certain molecules, a perfumier, I'm not going to call him that, a bootlegger, a thief, whatever you want. It's all good in my eyes, sunshine. But a certain person can identify not the notes, but the raw aroma chemicals that make up and create their own version of the fragrance. This process has become easier and easier, and although this process has been around for quite a number of years, it was Dua who not only pushed this on a huge scale, they did something even more disturbing. They made cloning a legitimate and trendy business model. The sheer temerity of their marketing was incredible. They came out and basically said to the world, yo, we're a clone house, and we're honest about it. We make the best clones, and you know what? Some of our clones are even better than what the actual fragrances smell like currently. They were completely open about the fact that they were inspirations, boasted that they were a clone company, that they were the best, and they've had no real consequences. They've reportedly had a couple of legal skirmishes here and there, but nothing to actually stop them. They have continued in spite of the non-stop ethical and moral questions. Is this brand stealing? Is this brand some sort of fragrance Robin Hood? Is this brand helping or hindering the industry? These are all good questions, and there's a number of answers. But one thing is for certain, and the reason that this year is on the list is because this was the beginning of the Clone Wars, and it has created brand after brand after brand, following them, and as long as no designer or niche brand that they're copying from is serious about stopping them, if there's no brand prepared to have the courage to get into a legal battle with Dua, then they are simply completely legitimizing their business model and basically saying, sure, take our work. We don't mind. Is it wrong? Is it right? Well, the answer is, either way, it's happening. And so far, nobody's actually serious about stopping it. Number 5. 1973. 1973 was the year that IFRA was founded, the International Fragrance Association. They created more regulation and standards and is considered the global representative body of the fragrance industry. IFRA has come under attack by many as they believe that IFRA are responsible for reformulations and ingredients being banned. But this isn't true. They are actually on the side of fragrances and attempt to forge compromises with usually dermatology companies who bring to the table the ethical component of using either real musk or the fact that skin rashes can be created by certain notes such as oat moss. It's IFRA's duty to actually try to come to a diplomatic resolution. IFRA are an incredibly important component to the creation and distribution of fragrance. 1973 was also the release of a fragrance that would shape the lineage of men's fragrances for many years to come. In 1950s and 1960s, fragrances had become stagnant and formulaic. Harsh florals for ladies and harsh musky smells for men. Perfume was hardcore and deep. However, in 1973, a fragrance came onto the market by fashion designer Paco Rabanne called Pour Homme. Derived from many barbershop fragrances, of which the history of barbershop fragrances can almost be a video in itself, but I feel as though if that wasn't a collaboration video with Mr. Smelly, I might be lynched. And seeing as he's the leader of the Fragcom, he has an army to do that. Paco Rabanne's Pour Homme was a paradigm shift for fougères with a lighter and fresher tone. Now interestingly, if you smell PRPH today, it wouldn't smell fresh by today's standards. It would probably smell quite heady and medicinal. But it was actually quite a culture shock for 1973 to have woody fougères. This fragrance would inspire many future woody fougères such as Kouros, Halcyon Z14 and others. Number 4, 2007. In 2007, higher priced niche and independent fragrance lines took charge for the first time in the mainstream. Now it was nothing compared to what was going to happen after 2010 with Aventus, but this was the year that proved that niche fragrances had a voice, and they weren't going to shut up anytime soon. Multiple fragrances were released that would change the momentum of fragrance history. In 2007, Tom Ford alone released in their private collection some of their all-time greats. Oud Wood, Tuscan Leather, Tobacco Vanille. Also Reflection Man by Amouage sent that company into the hands of the hype gods. Duro by Nosamato was released in 2007, Kobe by Xerjoff, and even Kilian started pushing their fragrances out, getting positive feedback. Even in the designer realms, it was a surprisingly experimental year, with releases like Fleur de Mal and Nisaso Rodriguez's For Him. Christian Dior would release a successful flanker to their fragrance Homme Intense, which was arguably the fragrance from that line that pushed it into the stratosphere. This was a great moment in fragrance history. There was no real working formula. There was no Bleu de Chanel or Sauvage or Aventus to lead the direction of what fragrance was supposed to be. Much better times. And finally, it was also the year when the internet started talking about fragrances. 2007 was actually the year when Fragrantica first went online and created a massive, unprecedented resource. It's an incredible asset that many reviewers such as myself can use, but also a wonderful asset for people to go and moan about the latest design of fragrance. It's Caillou, I'm looking at you, mate. Number 3, 1947. Christian Dior releases Miss Dior, which of course pushed the envelope for what was acceptable for women's fragrances. It was a more green and earthy scent that was extremely unusual compared to the more floral and womany fragrances that had come before. This was the year that launched Christian Dior into the stratosphere, along with their rebranding fashion-wise with brand new creations, brand new style. They even named one of their Dior Privés after this year, New Look 1947, and made them the lead rival with a certain other brand, which we will get to soon. But because of this huge success, it changed the mindset that there was only one prevailing designer house having a monopoly over everything. After 1947, more designer brands and therefore more designer fragrances started to come into focus. Number 2, 1996. 1996 is the year that fragrance started to become a global phenomenon, with some of the biggest and most influential fragrances that were effectively either born on this year or exploded. The 2 years previously were the run-up to this, with 1994 seeing the release of L'Odyssée by Issey Miyake, and then in 1995 with La Mal. But 1996 was the year that La Mal itself exploded into the mainstream popularity. If you went to basically any club in the United Kingdom, or most cities in Europe, and much of North America, you'd be smelling La Mal. But then the final knockout blow was Acqua di Gio. This cemented that mainstream fragrances were now firmly in the direction of clean, aromatic citruses. There was a wild card, however, that came out this same year, Angel Men. But La Mal, L'Odyssée, Angel Men and Acqua di Gio were at the absolute prime of their release. Hell, even Versace came out with the Dreamer. But those 4 mighty fragrances have gone on to influence every corner of the fragrance world for many years to come. We have a lot to thank for these 4 fragrances, as their effects are still being felt to this day. It was also a pretty huge year for women's fragrances, as Chanel released the original Allure. It had been 12 years since Chanel had had a major female fragrance release, and this one was a big deal, a huge hit for the time. Most of the fragrances today are inspired from the fragrances that were at the peak of their popularity or released in that year. And number 1, 1921. 1921 was essentially the birth of the big boom period in modern fine fragrance history. 2 essential fragrances were released that year. Number 1 being Shalimar by Guerlain, and secondly, Chanel's Number 5. This fragrance has been one of the most enduring, celebrated and loved fragrances of all time. I would never personally wear it, but I actually feel as though I should probably have a bottle of it just to feel like a serious collector. The release of these 2 gargantuans changed the game and made fragrance from something lovely to wear into a full-blown product, built in aspiration and desire. To explain how much of a culture shock Chanel's Number 5 was would require a video of its own. I'd probably need Clements for that video. But it changed the landscape of fragrance, not just culturally, but chemically. Number 5 was the first fragrance to use a huge amount of aldehydes, which is now a signature component of Chanel's fragrance, but also many other fragrances. Now, Coco Chanel was not the first person to use aldehydes, mind, but she was the first to use such a sustainable amount, most specifically C7, that gives Number 5 that jasmine pop. Chanel Number 5, and to an extent Shalimar, completely changed the way fragrances were made and how they are now perceived. And that's the list. Did you agree? Did you disagree? What other amazing years are in fragrance history? And if you haven't already, like, subscribe, comment. I'm the Fragrance Apprentice, and I will see you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye.